Welcome to Christian Reacts. In this video, Father Josiah Trentham, Orthodox Christian priest, defends the Crusades and talks about Islam with Ruslan, who's a Christian Protestant YouTube creator.
When it comes to the history of things like the Crusades, sometimes Christians will get a pretty bad rap, but there was also a practical aspect of trying to take back cities from a pretty massive conquest of Islam all over the world, right? Trying to take back the Holy Land. You just said you want Constantinople back, right? Do you think the Crusades, in their proper framework, not all of them, but generally speaking, what they were intending to do was misrepresented today by historians?
There were three major groups involved with the Crusades. The Muslims, who no one invited to come out of the Arabian Peninsula and put swords to people's necks and demand their property. Sorry. That's called theft, and we don't appreciate it. That's fundamental religious commitment, part of Islam. Jihad is not just a matter of spiritual work on the inside. Muhammad did say that's called the Great Jihad, and the Lesser Jihad is the political, military jihad. But in practice, the jihad that Muslims have been most committed to is the violent, physical, political jihad, which is very much happening right now all over Western Europe, as anyone who knows history knew it would. Are you expecting people who come to the West completely abandon their faith? This is fundamental. You don't fight, you don't inherit in Islam.
This is a really good point, and even we've seen this, even though India is not a Christian country, Muslims just take over that country in a lot of ways. We've seen it in the Middle East, where Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, a lot of these countries were Christian hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. And when you don't fight back, what happens is these Muslim extremists ethnically cleanse the population if you're not a believer. They basically say, okay, we're going to give you the chance to convert and become a Muslim. If you don't, here's the sword or a heavy tax at minimum.
I used to teach a class at the university, local university next to me, called The Cross and the Crescent, the history of Christian-Muslim relations. And I would always have the kids read the Quran. It's very short. It's nothing like the Bible. I would have them read the surahs, and I asked them to write down how many times explicit political, physical violence is commanded. My calculation is 123 times in a very short book. Maybe it's 119, maybe it's 130, depending on exactly how you read it. If you had, the Quran's not much bigger than your Godly Ambition book. If you had 123 references to physical violence, would you go around the world saying that jihad is not about physical violence?
Right.
And this is a great point that Josiah Trentham brings up, because there's so many debates that I've seen online about whether Islam is a religion of peace, and it's just laughable when there's over 100 references to violence in the Quran. It's very clear.
That's such a scam. It's such a ridiculous scam. And the people who quote that and say that just show that they have never actually read the Quran. If you read the classic Muslim lives of Muhammad, Muhammad himself led minimum 25 raids in which he people himself.
Wow.
At least 25. That's a minimum.
Yep.
At least 25 raids. And these are people who were not in conflict with him, Jewish and Christian tribes. He just wanted their land. He wanted their stuff. So he took it. I'm sorry. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely, completely ridiculous. Islam is one of the three parties involved in the Crusades. Having stolen Christian lands all over the most precious areas to us, all over what is today Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Egypt. They took those lands from us without asking. They're not nice. Not nice.
I like it says not nice, like it's just a small inconvenience. Not nice. Just take these lands from us where Jesus Christ walked and had his daily life on for thousands of years, having these traditions from Orthodox Christians to Catholics. And yeah, it's very misrepresented in my view.
And they give us options, right? You can die
Or pay the jizya.
Pay the jizya. Absolutely. And not just that. You have to also obey Sharia. You have to follow the Sharia law, which means there's no evangelization or we kill you. You can't have public processions. You can't go. Are you kidding? Christians have never been contained within their churches. We worship in the churches, but then we take the gospel message out to the world. We walk out singing Christ is risen, and we carry crosses and banners with Jesus glorified on them. This is how we do things. And to be told by the Muslims, you can't do that. You can't ring bells. You can't go on processions on Easter. This is our life. I'm sorry. Oh, that is the sorrow. And no Christians have suffered under Islam more than the Orthodox. So whatever Westerners think they know, ask us. Ask us. We have long lists of martyrs.
I think he makes a really great point here when he talks about the martyrs and the martyrdoms of many of the Christians in the Middle East and around the world, because I think there's a huge bias that in the media that doesn't cover the brutality that Christians faced, and the persecution that's going on in Africa. That's just not reported. Dozens of people being eliminated, and because I have to use that word because YouTube will flag it, but it's really disheartening and sad what we're seeing right now.
Long lists, and not just 7th century martyrs. Century after century. They tried to take Constantinople in 717. If the Mother of God hadn't defended the city and slaughtered them, which she did, amazingly, they were so destroyed in 717 that they didn't try again for 600 years. They wanted Constantinople from the beginning. They finally came back 1453, May 29th. They took Constantinople. So for us, that was like yesterday. It was like yesterday.
And also to add, that's why I believe that there's a negative rap or a negative representation of the Crusades. And of course, Christians, we're not for violence with no justification at all. We'll just enact violence and take over lands. That's not at all in the Bible, or at least what Jesus Christ calls us to do in evangelism. We speak the truth in the name of love in Jesus, and we share the gospel. And if that message isn't reciprocated, we take on and move somewhere else. We don't repress voices at all in the Christian belief. That's not what we do. And I think that's what the bias is with the Crusades, because when the Christians actually battled and won and defended the borders of Europe against the Muslim invaders, it's seen as a negative because it was a war. But the thing is, the Christians actually won that, so it's a positive thing for the Christian belief. And now what we're seeing is the Muslim perpetrators, are already in many of the European countries, having a birth rate like 2 or 3 times that of Christians there, and that's a huge problem that we're having with the immigration, and that's a whole other separate discussion. But regardless, that's why the Crusades is seen as a negative thing in the media, in my opinion.
To get into the Orthodox mind about time, I'll give you an example. The late Pope John Paul II, before he died, he's Polish. He grew up with a bunch of Orthodox friends. He had Orthodox in his family. He had Eastern bishops consecrate him when he became a bishop. The whole eastern part of Poland today is Orthodox. We typically think of Poland as a Catholic country, which it is. Before he died, he wanted to make a pilgrimage in the footsteps of St. Paul. And that would require him going to Greece. Well, since the schism, no pope had ever stepped foot in Greece. It was never allowed. So he wrote to the Archbishop of Athens, who presides over the Synod of Greek bishops, like 70 metropolitan archbishops who govern that country. And he said, look, I'm going to die, and I want to go on a pilgrimage. Can I come? No pope has ever come since the schism. That's 800 years. And they said, no, you can't. And he said, well, what if I apologize? And they said, well, tell us more about that. And what he was referring to was the Fourth Crusade in 1204. The Crusaders got distracted because, as I was describing, there's 3 parties in the Crusades: the Muslims, the Orthodox. We were involved in the First Crusade and the First Crusade only, when our emperor, Alexius Comnenus, an unbelievable emperor, an incredible man, participated and welcomed the Westerners to help get the Muslims out. It went very bad. And from that moment on, we don't want anything to do with these Crusades. The fourth was so bad that the Western soldiers, on their way supposedly to deliver us from Islam, got distracted and literally attacked Constantinople, murdered our bishops and priests, our nuns on our altars, and took over the city from 1204 to 1261. Put in Latin bishops, Latin leaders. I mean, we've never forgotten that. We've never forgotten that. So when the Pope said, hey, I want to come before I die.
Wow, this is really fascinating. I think this is a really interesting point, because when we all think about, even me included, think about the Crusades, I automatically imagine Christians battling Muslims, and that's true. That's not incorrect. But I think we often forget about Orthodox and Catholics fighting amongst each other, and even doing those horrific war crimes that Josiah Trentham mentions right here.
And he said, I apologize. They said, well, tell us more about them. So finally, they trusted him. They said, okay, if you're going to come, and if you'll agree not to enter a single church, they didn't let him go in one church, not to enter a single church, if when you get off the plane, you come and sit next to the Archbishop of Athens on television and apologize for what you did in 1204, we'll let you come. And he did.
Wow.
He flew into Athens. You know, he would always get off and kiss the ground wherever he went. Right? He kissed the ground, immediately went to the podium, and on national television read a detailed apology for the slaughter of the Orthodox at the Fourth Crusade in 1204. We forgave, and he had his pilgrimage. I mention that because what Westerner?
Wow, that's beautiful.
What Western Christian would have a kind of a memory like that? Where everything's very short for us, right? We think that we're having our 250th anniversary as a nation next year. And what Westerner could think in 800-year terms. But in the Orthodox mind, that's like yesterday, right? I mean, the church is 2,000 years old, and we're constantly engaged in our history. It's not like us. It's just a thing of the past. So the Crusades is a very, very sensitive subject for us, a very sensitive subject. I'm not sure there's great edification in thinking too much about it, but we certainly have a lot to contribute to our friends in the West who are allowing Muslims to come in great numbers. If you want to know how it's going to go, you should ask us, because we actually have 14 centuries of lived experience with Muslims. 14 centuries. And it's still horrible. What's going on today in Syria, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And for those who don't know, there was a terrible attack on a Christian church in Syria, slaughtering dozens, and it was just terrible, horrific attack. And obviously, what's going on in Africa, Nigeria. There's another place I think they're in Africa as well. I mean, just horrific events that's happening, and you really have to dig for this information. And he's completely right. Europe has brought in unvetted many of Muslim immigrants, and the problem with doing that is it is going to harbor a potential disaster if these young men mostly hold to the standard of an extremist Islamic ideology.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, I told you some of my backstory growing up in Azerbaijan, which is just just east of Armenia, right? And then Turkey is on the other side, right? West is Turkey. A lot of historical Armenia is now modern day Turkey, the Armenian genocide of 1915. And so when people are talking about Islamic influence in the West, the downstream effects of it, I've lived it. I've seen it. I've seen people get displaced. Oddly enough, folks that grew up, Arzis and Armenians grew up together, friends. You know, some of my mom and dad still keep in touch with their Arzi friends. But the mindset and the philosophy behind that's driving the ethnic cleansing that happened to the Armenians. And then it just happened again in 2023, September 2023, 100,000 Armenians were ethnically cleansed from the 2023, September 2023, 100,000 Armenians were ethnically cleansed from the eastern part of Azerbaijan.
Wow, I had to rewind that because I had to hear that again. 100,000 Armenians were displaced. I mean, goodness, it's heartbreaking.
In this Nagorno-Karabakh region, which is like this neutral zone, and they were just displaced. And no one talked about it. 2 weeks later, October 7th happens, and so everybody forgot about the 100,000, up to 120,000 Armenians that were just displaced from that region again. And so it's the fruit of it in terms of how it deals with Christians in that part of the region is very, very dark. So that's why I was curious your perspective and you tying it into what is happening all over. They said in London the number one baby boy name was Muhammad.
Oh yeah, that's not just London. That's throughout England,
Yeah.
and that's for years.
Yeah.
Not just for a year or two. That's years
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah.
There are very many positives, of course, and I'm certainly not trying to judge and be mean to Muslim people. But we do have strong things to say. The earliest Christian commentary on Islam comes from St. John of Damascus, one of the great fathers of the church. He's the first one to write anything, theologically speaking, evaluating Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very clear about what he said and called Muhammad Antichrist and Islam a heresy. He actually lists it as a heresy because of the Christian influence on Muhammad, and which is very evident in the Quran, both an Orthodox Christian influence and also a heretical Christian influence, both in the Quran. But we've had a consistent witness to Muslims for 14 centuries. We still feel the same way today. There are many benefits for them in the West, though. Now many, many Muslims are becoming Christians all across the West, which is a great blessing for them. If they did that in their hometown, they'd be killed. If they were in Muslim lands, it's forbidden to convert to Christianity, and you will be killed. I spent, when I was a young man.
This is 100% true. I mean, there was, I think, acid thrown on a woman's face when she was even, I don't know if she was considering being a Christian or just like the treatment in Pakistan. It's just horrific. I know in Iran you could get completely eliminated for converting. It's very scary what happens in the worldwide, and that's why we cannot take freedom of expression, freedom of religious practice and faith for granted ever, because it's just not the case worldwide.
Man, I spent a summer in Pakistan, mostly working with Christians. Christians were tolerated in Pakistan because if they threw all of the Christians out, they wouldn't have any doctors or nurses. The Christians ran all the hospitals. And I was part of a mission team that was working with the Christians in the hospitals. And I remember sitting and having tea with a young man, maybe a year or two older than me. I was 19 at the time. I think he was 21. He and his wife had converted to Christianity and thought it would be a loving and irresponsible thing to do to tell his father and his mom. So he sat down at dinner. His dad stood up, went out into the shed and got a pickaxe and came and tried to kill the spot.
My goodness.
And it had
Unreal. This is wild, and this is supposed to be the religion of peace. I mean, this is horrific, and wow. It's one thing to be disappointed, angry, and upset. It's another thing to try to do this to your only one of your sons. I mean, this is just disgusting.
It's been a year or two since he saw his parents, and he said, I'll never be able to see my parents again.
That's awful.
My dad will kill him on the spot.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That was just normal Pakistani family.
You have a marriage conference coming up.
October 10th and 11th.
October 10th and 11th.
Fox Theater in Riverside, California. Can I say a little bit about it?
Please.
So,
Okay, I think I'll skip this a little bit.
And all of the sorrows that associate with the breaking down of the family when marriage is not honored. And for that reason, we're inviting.
Okay, I think that's all about the Crusades and Islam. But yeah, please comment your thoughts below about it, because this is a very difficult subject. And I think that as Christians, we should all be educated on this, read the history, and never forget the history that has happened. Because as one of the sayings go, if you don't know history, if you don't remember it, if you don't cherish it and learn about it, it's bound to happen again. And we've seen this with, the genocide that's ongoing in the Middle East right now. We're seeing this occurring right now with in Europe with the displacement that's going to happen. I mean, Christians are not going to be in the majority in a very short amount of time, because the Western European countries are not protecting their borders, and it's very disappointing. But regardless of that point, the Crusades it wasn't as in-depth a video as I'd like, but the Crusades, for the most part, in defense of the Christian morality against Islamic jihad crusaders, or Islamic jihad invaders, better noted, is a good thing overall, because if Christians just laid down their weapons and let the Muslims come in, not only do they lose everything, but the children don't learn about Christ, and it's a fallen society. So this is a really interesting breakdown. I appreciate the history that Josiah talks about here with the Orthodox roots in the Middle East, in Europe as well, and how Ruslan, who has Armenian heritage in his family, talking about the over 100,000 displaced people displacement that occurs, that is not talked about. So this is really interesting and fascinating content. So please like, share, and subscribe, and thank you all for watching.